Hey Dan, hope you're doing great.
I'm
Just a
good. How
second.
are you?
I'm great. We are very happy to have you with us as our guest in the brand new series of Media Matters on the Fublis. And I'm your host and I'm your interviewer today. And I'm honored to be your interviewer.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, before starting the questions and this whole insane conversations which we'll have today, I would like to inform you that this interview, which we are having right now, will be published on the website of Fublis. So you can sign up to the Fublis website and then you'll get the access to watch this interview. And we'll just post it in maybe 1 or 2 days.
Great. Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah. So shall we proceed with the questions?
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. You have worked with major names in design and designs media for over a decade. How has the landscape of architecture and the interior design changed over your career?
I think what's interesting has been engagement from the public in terms of design. I think over the past over a decade, the general public have become so much more interested and engaged in interiors design, specifically in architecture as a whole. I think the pandemic had something to do with that. I think they had more time to sit in their homes and think about how design impacted their lives in general. And that interest then for a lot of people into renovation projects or thinking about moving to a new home. And that general awareness of how design impacts life, I think, becomes so much more in the mind's eye when you're forced to focus on it in that way. And then in terms of how that impacted the media landscape, I think that more and more publications saw that there was an appetite for people who are engaged in this content and wanting to learn more about design, wanted to see more inspiration in terms of how people were using architecture and design in different ways. And so that kind of exploded in terms of the amount of content that we're seeing today.
Okay. Well, what are the main problems that you have faced in the course of both writing and editing about the architecture and interior industry, and how did you overcome them?
I think one of the challenges is that there are so many incredible projects and incredible designers and not enough people writing about it. I think that it's very, very difficult to try and cover everything that you want to. I get inundated with different projects that are incredible from all over the world, from people who want their work published, and yeah, there's just not enough capacity to cover them all. And I think just creating enough space and time for these people and projects to have a good platform, I think is the best way to overcome that. It's not something that I've personally been able to do, but it's a group effort in terms of the media landscape in general and how many not just specific architecture and design publications, but wider media organizations can help to incorporate design into their output so that people can really like have as much exposure as possible and we can publish as much great work as there is out there.
Well, great. Okay. So, I'm trying to find out more about your practice as a creative consultancy. What does a typical project looks like or it feels like, and how does you approach it?
So I work with a range of creative businesses, some large, some small, and every project and every client I have is different. Some of them need help with branding and communications and editorial work on a wider scale. So thinking about larger strategy in terms of how they position their company. These are typically companies that work within the design industry, be they branding agencies or interior design studios. And so helping them find their voice and create a narrative around what they're working on is something that I'm really engaged with. And then oftentimes some smaller projects will include helping to create the editorial for their website or their social media, just to help build a better sense of brand and a sense of tone for an individual or a company to help them grow and develop.
That's interesting, by the way. Having written for top designs publications, how do you make sure the content is going to be relevant or and the content should be engaging for the audience that is constantly being exposed with the new trends?
I think it requires a level of taste. I think most people that work in the design media industry they do so because they're considered to have good taste. I mean, I don't want to say that about myself, but a lot of my colleagues definitely do. And it's really finding a balance between the projects that we know people are going to like because it's something they're used to seeing and it develops in a certain way, and then bringing in new types of work, new types of styles gradually and slowly to help inform like general trends and move design forward in that respect. And also finding new and interesting talent that really works in an innovative way to make sure that we're always introducing new emerging designers into the mix and making sure that that everyone is represented as best as possible.
Okay, very well said. Okay, what in your opinion, Dan, are some of the ingredients that make for a hard-hitting editorial in the domain of architecture and design?
I mean, I think that hard hitting is a difficult word to use in this sense because design media isn't changing the world in the way that war reporting or environmental reporting is doing. I do think that there are ways in which, if you look at it from a news perspective, there are ways to change the industry. When we think about editorial that covers like gender pay gaps across architecture practices, or if there are any injustices or there's been gross negligence on a project, exposing that kind of thing in a reporting style rather than just sort of simply showing nice pictures of nice projects all the time, that can help to create something that helps to move the needle in terms of how the industry develops.
Okay. Okay, getting it. What role do you think storytelling plays in architecture and branding, and how do you weave this into your work?
I think storytelling is everything in the way that I work. I think that everybody has a story, and particularly designers and architects, creativity is narrative based inherently. And so bringing that story to the foreground, finding the most interesting parts of it, and then creating a narrative that will make sense to the general public is a tool that I try to use with all the clients that I work with. Typically, how that would work is like I will interview somebody and speak to them at length about their background and their education and the work that they've done up to date, and then try and pick out the most interesting parts of that, and then present it in a form that's digestible, whether that's an article or a video or a series of social media posts. But it's people want to know personal stories. I think anyone can design a nice, not anybody, but a lot of people can design a nice space or a nice building, but it's the reasons why from a personal perspective and a general societal context as to what makes that interesting.
Okay, well, I was very curious to know the answer of this question. Well, anything you can share would be great for me. Just tell me the example of a project where, through your writing and editorial direction, you really impacted the branding or perceptions of the design firm.
A really great example of this is that years ago, I went to the Royal College of Art graduate fashion show in London. I saw the work of a really incredible designer. Her name was Maiko Takeda. And she created this beautiful millinery collection, all these spiky headpieces. I wrote an article about her work, and that article made its way to Bjork, the singer. And she ended up commissioning this designer to create all of her tour costumes, pieces that she wore in her album artwork. And the designer then gained so much traction and success. She ended up going to work for firms and brands like Issey Miyake, and top fashion houses. And so it's so interesting how that one small article all that many years ago completely changed the trajectory of somebody's career, and that makes me so proud and so happy that I do the job that I do. That's what makes the job like all the more interesting and special.
Interesting. Okay. As the design industry is increasing geared towards sustainability, how do you feel this is reflected in your work, both in writing and consulting aspects?
So in terms of writing, I mean, sustainability is such an important topic at the moment and should be at the forefront of any writer or design publications ethos. If any project that I write about does have a sustainability aspect, I always make sure to include the details of that in any article and just to do what I can to highlight good work that's happening across the world. And I also work with an organization called The World Around, and we have an initiative called the Young Climate Prize, which is it's a mentorship program for 25 young people who we pair with top creatives, architects, artists, and other professionals around the world, who are at the top of their field, as a platform for helping them to build up their projects that focus specifically on climate action in their communities. And then at the end of the program, their work is judged, and three of them are flown to New York and get to speak at the World Around annual summit, which is a conference that happens here. And working on the editorial side of that and helping to tell the stories of these young people and their incredible projects is something that I find incredibly important. It's a nonprofit organization, and so anything that anyone can do to help champion and highlight this type of work, I think, is so imperative today.
Well, you have multiple great stories to tell, by the way. I'm very interested in knowing everything and, every story of yours. Okay, so the last question for you, Dan, is given in the depth of your experience in interiors and architecture, what do you think are going to be some of the imminent trends or technologies that are really going to push design media in new direction, like in the next 5 years or 10 years?
I think a lot of the conversations that are happening right now are around AI and how they're going to impact our industry directly. I think when you have tools like ChatGPT that can just spit out writing for you without really much thought, I think that
Exactly.
for many of us, we're thinking about how that's going to impact the way that we're asked to do our jobs and how media is going to be created in the future. But I think that what's become clear is that none of these technologies are quite yet ready to do that full job. And even once they're so sophisticated, it's still always going to need a human touch and a human hand as an editor, or someone to come in and make narratives more personal. And we talked about personal branding earlier, and I think that you can't get that from a machine. You have to add in that special spice that makes something enjoyable and relevant for someone to read rather than just spitting out information. But the way that writers and AI are going to work together for the next few years, I think, is going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. But I'm hopeful that we're not going to lose our jobs, and that there's still going to be a place for writers in the design media world.
Exactly. Somewhere we have to put, our heart, our thoughts in that. And, when writing in emotion is something all like the readers, they want, emotions to be, counted, not like a machine
Exactly.
that's doing work. Okay, well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for giving your precious time, Dan. It's a pleasure to take your interview. And one thing more, do not forget to sign up to the Fublis website so that you can check out the interview.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.